Alright, listen to me for a second. Imagine you're sitting right next to me. We're not on YouTube, not on social media. Just two guys talking honestly. No filters. No pretending. And I lean over and say this to you quietly so it actually sinks in. The avoidant doesn't end up with the woman who loved him the most. He doesn't end up with the most patient woman. He doesn't even end up with the right woman. That alone probably messes with your head a little. Because everything you've been told says, if you're good enough, if you're consistent enough, if you love hard enough, eventually he'll choose you. That's a lie. A comfortable one, but still a lie. And this video is going to make a lot of men uncomfortable. Not because it's cruel, but because it's honest. See, most men think avoidant people are mysterious, emotionally deep, or just damaged souls who need time. So they wait. They overextend. They explain themselves. They lower their standards. They convince themselves that endurance equals masculinity. But what actually happens behind the scenes is very different. Avoidants don't wake up one day and suddenly become emotionally available because you love them correctly. They don't reward patience with commitment. And they don't choose partners based on emotional depth the way you think they do. In fact, the person they end up with is usually the opposite of who you imagine. Not the one who challenged them. Not the one who wanted depth. Not the one who asked for clarity. They end up with someone who doesn't require emotional presence. And if you're a man watching this, you need to understand something clearly. This isn't about blaming women or glorifying avoidance. This is about you. Your choices. Your self-respect. Your patterns. Because too many men stay stuck trying to win someone who was never playing the same game. This video isn't here to shame you. It's here to wake you up. I'm going to break down who avoidants actually end up with, why it's not who you think, and, most importantly, what this means for you if you want peace, stability, and real connection in your life. Stay with me. This conversation might save you years of confusion. Let me say something that's going to challenge a belief a lot of men hold on to, especially good men. Being emotionally available does not automatically make you desirable to an avoidant. In fact, it often does the opposite. Now sit with that for a second. Most men are taught that emotional openness is the key. Communicate clearly. Be consistent. Be present. Be supportive. And don't get me wrong, those are healthy traits. They matter deeply in secure relationships. But here's the controversial truth. Avoidants don't experience emotional availability as safety. They experience it as pressure. When you're emotionally open with an avoidant, you're unknowingly holding up a mirror. And that mirror reflects everything they're not ready to face. Needs, expectations, vulnerability, accountability. Even if you never demand anything explicitly, your presence alone raises the emotional temperature. And avoidants don't move toward heat. They move away from it. This is why the nice, emotionally available guy so often gets confused. He does everything right. He listens. He shows up. He tries to create clarity. And yet, somehow, he's the one being distanced from. Not because he's weak. Not because he's boring. But because he makes the emotional cost visible. Avoidants prefer relationships where emotional depth is optional, not expected. Where no one notices when communication drops. Where emotional silence isn't questioned. Where connection exists, but only at a surface level. So when an emotionally available man enters the picture, something uncomfortable happens. The avoidant feels seen. And being seen without the tools to respond feels overwhelming. Here's where men misinterpret the situation. They assume the avoidant needs more reassurance, more patience, more understanding. So they double down. They soften their needs. They explain themselves better. They become even more accommodating. But what the avoidant learns from this isn't trust. It's that you'll adjust before they have to. And once that dynamic is set, the avoidant doesn't feel inspired to grow. They feel relieved. Relieved that you'll carry the emotional weight while they stay protected. That's why the emotionally available man often doesn't win in the end. Avoidants don't reward emotional labor. They escape it. The partner they choose long-term is usually someone who doesn't ask for emotional presence consistently. Someone who is self-contained, distracted, emotionally guarded, or simply doesn't push for depth. That relationship feels quieter, less demanding, less exposing. And here's the part that really matters for you as a man. This doesn't mean emotional availability is wrong. It means emotional availability should never come at the cost of your self-respect. If someone pulls away when you show up fully, that's information, not a challenge to fix yourself. A healthy relationship is one where your emotional openness is met, not managed. Where presence doesn't feel like pressure. Where connection doesn't require you to constantly reassure someone who refuses to meet you halfway. So if you've ever been the man who did everything right, and still got left behind, understand this clearly. You weren't too much. You were just offering depth to someone who only wanted distance. And once you see that, you stop trying to prove your value to people who benefit from your silence. Let's talk about this in a way that feels real, because if you've lived it, you already know what I'm about to say. An avoidant doesn't end up with the person who made them feel alive. They end up with the person who feels familiar. And familiar doesn't mean healthy. It means predictable. It means emotionally quiet. It means nothing is being asked that they don't already know how to avoid. If you've ever been close to an avoidant, you probably noticed a pattern. Things feel fine as long as no one talks about feelings too deeply. As long as no one asks, "Where is this going?" As long as no one notices the distance growing. The relationship survives by staying just below the surface. That's the environment avoidants settle into. They feel most comfortable with someone who doesn't interrupt their emotional rhythm. Someone who is okay with long pauses in communication. Someone who doesn't need reassurance. Someone who's used to doing life independently. Not because that connection is strong, but because it doesn't require adjustment. This is why it feels confusing when you look at who they choose later. You expect fireworks. You expect intensity. You expect someone impressive or emotionally deep. Instead, it often looks quiet. No big conversations. No emotional friction. No pressure to grow. Just routine. And for an avoidant, routine feels safe. Here's the relatable part for men. You might have noticed that when you stopped asking questions, things felt smoother. When you cared less, there was less tension. When you pulled back emotionally, they seemed calmer. That wasn't coincidence. That was the relationship becoming familiar to them. Avoidants don't crave excitement the way people think. Excitement disrupts control. What they crave is emotional predictability, even if that predictability includes distance. So they often end up with someone whose emotional style mirrors their own. Not too expressive. Not too demanding. Not too curious. Someone who doesn't notice what's missing because missing has always been normal. And this is where men get stuck emotionally. They compare themselves and think, what does that person have that I don't? The answer is simple and uncomfortable. They don't require presence. That doesn't make them better. It makes them easier to stay with. And here's the part you need to hear clearly. Just because a relationship lasts doesn't mean it's deeply connected. Avoidance can maintain long-term relationships built on familiarity without ever touching real intimacy. From the outside, it looks stable. From the inside, it's emotionally minimal. So if you've ever felt replaced by someone who seemed less invested, less expressive, or less emotionally demanding, understand this. You weren't rejected because you lacked value. You were incompatible with a system built to avoid depth. And once you see that, you stop trying to be familiar to people who never learned how to feel safe with closeness. Now this is the part where I'm going to speak directly to you as a man. And I need you to stay open, not defensive. Because some of the pain men experience with avoidance isn't accidental. It's trained. And no one tells you this early enough. When you consistently over-explain, over-accommodate, and emotionally chase someone who keeps pulling away, you send a quiet message, "I'll adjust so you don't have to." And avoidants learn fast. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness. A lot of men believe patience is strength. So they tolerate inconsistency. They excuse emotional absence. They minimize their own needs to keep the peace. They convince themselves that being low maintenance makes them more valuable. But here's the calm truth. You don't earn connection by making yourself smaller. When you stay in situations where your needs aren't met, you teach avoidance that distance has no consequences. They learn they can disappear emotionally and still keep access to you. And once that dynamic sets in, respect slowly erodes, not because they're cruel, but because the relationship doesn't require effort to maintain. This is where men need a wake-up call. You are not responsible for fixing someone's emotional patterns. And the more you try, the more you reinforce them. Avoidants don't heal through being chased. They stabilize through boundaries. If every time they withdraw you become more understanding, more flexible, more quiet, you're not being strong. You're being predictable. And predictability without boundaries creates emotional imbalance. Here's the uncomfortable self-reflection most men avoid. Ask yourself, did you speak up early? Did you walk away when things felt one-sided? Or did you stay and hope consistency would be rewarded? Because hope without standards is how men stay stuck. This is the advice part, and it's simple, but not easy. If someone pulls away when you express needs, you don't soften the needs. You observe the response. If someone becomes distant when intimacy grows, you don't chase closeness. You hold your ground. And if someone only feels comfortable when you're emotionally quiet, you don't become quieter. You become unavailable. Not to punish, but to protect your self-respect. Avoidants don't change because someone loves them harder. They change when the cost of avoidance becomes real. So the moment you stop training people to leave without consequences, the moment you stop being an option and start being a standard. And that shift alone will change who stays in your life, and who was never meant to. Let's finish this part with the truth most people avoid saying out loud. Avoidants often settle before they heal. Not because they're evil. Not because they're incapable of love. But because healing requires discomfort, and settling allows them to stay functional without facing it. By the time an avoidant chooses someone long-term, it usually isn't a dramatic moment of clarity. It's quiet, gradual, practical. It's the relationship that asks the least while offering enough stability to look like progress. And from the outside, it can be confusing. You see them commit. You see routine. You see longevity. And a part of you wonders, so they were capable all along? Here's the calm, uncomfortable answer. They were capable of staying, not necessarily of connecting. Avoidants can build lives with people without ever resolving their emotional distance. They can share space, routines, responsibilities, without sharing vulnerability. That's not healing. That's adaptation. The person they end up with is often someone who doesn't question emotional gaps. Someone who accepts, this is just how they are. Someone who confuses peace with absence of conflict. And for an avoidant, that feels like success. But here's the part men need to understand deeply. Just because someone commits doesn't mean they've grown. Commitment without emotional availability is just structure. It looks solid, but it's hollow underneath. Avoidants don't suddenly become present because time passed. They become present when they choose to confront what they've been avoiding. And many don't, because settling offers relief without accountability. So when you compare yourself to who they chose, you're often comparing depth to durability. You offered growth. They chose sustainability. Neither is wrong, but they're not the same. And this is where the shift happens for you. Instead of asking, why wasn't I chosen? Ask, would I have been fulfilled staying? Because the truth is, many men weren't rejected, they were spared. You weren't too intense. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person for something they weren't ready to give. Once you stop romanticizing who someone settles with, you stop feeling behind. You start seeing clearly. And clarity is freedom. When you choose relationships that require mutual presence, not just shared space, you stop competing with comfort and start building something real. I'm going to end this with a statement that's going to divide opinions, and that's intentional. Most avoidants don't lose the right person. They lose the person who would have forced them to grow. And if you're a man listening to this, that should change how you see your past completely. Because what you experienced wasn't failure. It was friction. And friction only exists when something real is trying to form. Avoidants don't walk away from shallow connections. They walk away from depth they're not ready to hold. So if you've ever watched someone move on quickly, settle down quietly, or commit in a way they never did with you, understand this. That relationship didn't replace what you offered. It avoided it. And here's where I want to connect with you directly. This channel isn't about blaming anyone. It's about clarity. It's about helping men stop internalizing rejection that was never personal. You don't need to become colder. You don't need to suppress your emotional depth. You need to stop offering it where it isn't respected. If any part of this video felt uncomfortably familiar, I want you to comment your experience below. Say what you went through. Say what confused you. I read them, and when I can, I reach out. Because these conversations matter. And you're not the only one who's lived this. The moment you stop chasing people who choose comfort over connection is the moment your life gets quieter. In the best way. And that's when the right people finally recognize you. Stay grounded. Stay aware. And don't shrink yourself for anyone who calls your presence too much.